Hi, my name is Brian, and today I will be discussing Chapter 6 on memory. And what memory is a system that uses the information we receive from our senses and puts it into information that we can use throughout our lives. And now I'm going to show a video clip that provides some great insight on memory and how memory works.
These are just tricks. They are tricks that work because they are based on some pretty basic principles about how our brains work. And you don't have to be building memory palaces or memorizing packs of playing cards to benefit from a little bit of insight about how your mind works. We often talk about people with great memories as though it were some sort of an innate gift, but that is not the case. Great memories are learned. At the most basic level, we remember when we pay attention. We remember when we are deeply engaged. We remember when we are able to take a piece of information and experience and figure out why it is meaningful to us, why it is significant, why it's colorful, when we're able to transform it in some way that it makes sense in the light of all of the other things floating around in our minds, when we're able to transform bakers into bakers.
More specifically, I will be talking about three specific topics. The first one is information processing. The second is levels of processing. And finally, I will be discussing rehearsal. First off, we have information processing model, which is the way in which our mind processes the information we receive from our sensory organs. The first way in which we organize this information is through something called encoding. Now, one way in which I like to compare encoding and the information processing model in general is comparing it to a program. Now, I know a lot of you don't know programming, but the simple concept behind this is comparing the way in which we store and utilize information and the way the computer does the same. So if the computer asks us for our name, that name is then stored into the computer memory, and then the computer uses that memory to output some type of response that shows up on the screen. So if we run this program, we can see that the computer asks for our name. When we put in our name, that name is sent to the computer storage. Afterwards, the computer grabs that information and shows it on the screen for us, as we can see here. So if we compare this to the information processing model, we can say that encoding is equivalent to us typing in our name when it asks us for our name. And then storage is when the computer stores that name into the actual hard drive of the computer so it can be utilized later. And then finally, retrieval would be when the program actually showed us our name on the screen. However, there is something called encoding error in which the information isn't processed correctly. So this would lead to an issue when trying to retrieve that information. For example, here in the program, if we were to not put any name, it would just say hello without any message afterwards, and this would be an encoding error because the program didn't receive the accurate information it needed in order to process that information. So to summarize, encoding would be the initial process of recording the information. Storage would be holding the information for a certain amount of time. And finally, retrieval would be actually utilizing that information like we saw in the program. The next topic is called the levels of processing theory, and this is basically a model that states that information that is given a more valuable meaning will be remembered more efficiently and last for a longer period of time. There are three basic levels to this theory. First, we have the shallow level, then the intermediate level, and then finally the deepest level. The shallow level deals with information processing in relation to physical or sensory characteristics. So one method in which I try to remember the levels of processing theory is by comparing it to learning something on piano, such as scales or chords. So when I was younger, when I would first learn songs, I would write the letters of each note on them, and this would be an example of the shallow level, just playing individual notes. The intermediate level deals with processing that information into meaningful units. The next level, the intermediate level, would be putting all those notes together. So for this chord, it would be the F sharp, A, and then D. Finally, the deepest level is when information is actually analyzed in terms of its actual meaning. And then finally, on the deepest level, it would be putting them all together to actually make the chord. So it would be. Another example of the deepest level for this would be connecting it to a song, and in this example I use Clocks by Coldplay. The final topic that I will be discussing in this video is rehearsal. There are two types of rehearsal. The first one is called maintenance, and the second one is called elaborative. So maintenance rehearsal is basically the constant repetition of the information that you are trying to remember for later on. So this is an old notebook of mine that I had when I was in school that I actually found recently, and this is something that my parents made me do because when I was around, I think, 4th grade, I had trouble spelling isosceles. And so my parents made me repeat the word here. I forgot how many times until I was able to spell it by myself. And this is actually an example of maintenance rehearsal. And although I was able to spell it after this, I don't think I was able to actually understand the meaning of the word until later on when I was able to actually apply it to geometry. Elaborative rehearsal is the way in which you consider information you receive from your sensory organs in a meaningful way. So one method that's pretty common for elaborative rehearsal is mnemonics. And in this mnemonic, we have PEMDAS, which is a pretty common mnemonic that we learn in grade school. And this is an example of a way that we can group this information into meaningful units that will help us remember it later on.